What is jazz? This is a question often asked but seldom answered. Jazz can be hard to pinpoint, mainly because its sonic landscape keeps changing, defying the confines of genre. Yet the enduring movement of jazz suggests that a shared idea remains. What I want to explore in this video is a relation between the idea of jazz and the persisting drive for new sound. Before we can have a discussion on sound, we first need a clear definition of what sound is. The simple definition would be something along the lines of the specific timbre of the instruments used. But it is more complex than that. The way a musician plays is subject to the possibilities his instrument provides. A musical style can also dictate a selection of sounds. A musical approach or philosophy can influence how the sound takes shape. And a feeling sought after by the musician will inevitably result in a preference of style. So in reality, sound is the holistic unification of instrument, stylistic idiom, and musical idea. What made jazz unique was not the original sound it had, but the culture that surrounded it. With improvisation at the heart of the musical scene, it allowed an individual musician to distinguish himself by the sound he had on his instrument, both in what he played and how he played it. Sonny Rollins practiced under a bridge for months to refine his style. Other musicians were just plain eccentric. When jazz became mainstream and swing defined the sound of the nation, some musicians began to resent the commercialism it brought. They wanted to go back to a culture of creation rather than rehearsal. Bebop spread, defined by musical intellectualism and technical prowess. But when the pinnacle of speed and complexity has been reached, something else must be done. Smooth jazz doesn't impress through energy and technical mastery, but creates musical tension through restraint and control.
You make me smile with my heart.
Then came along Miles Davis. Collaborating with pianist Bill Evans, they immersed themselves in the possibilities of modal music, trying to undo the shackles of traditional jazz song structure, creating more space for new improvisations. John Coltrane pushed these boundaries, his efforts representing a spiritual search, his music coming in sheets of sound. But for some this wasn't enough. Ornette Coleman envisioned the concept of harmonics, where every aspect of musical structure can be bent or broken to the artist's desire. Which leads us to free jazz, where the push for ultimate harmonic freedom drove music to the disintegration point. When it comes to the combination of newer musical styles with that of jazz, we can count on a defensive reaction. These different fusions have been blamed with commercialism, and movements of traditionalism have sought to preserve the original sound of jazz. But let's not forget that the blending and abstraction of musical styles has been at the heart of jazz from the very beginning. Not only was jazz in its first incarnation a combination of different musical forms, like the Negro spiritual, the blues, and ragtime, it has always stolen ideas from other genres.
The instrument, guitar. The beat, bossa nova. The artist, one of the inventors of this exciting all-new sound, Antonio Carlos Jobim.
We find another example in the modern jazz quartet, who, inspired by the elegant subtlety of classical chamber music, gave their own unique image to jazz. The biggest turn in jazz history came with fusion, in its beginnings referred to as jazz rock. Miles Davis and his group of frequent collaborators started experimenting with electric instruments, like you hear on the avant-garde album In a Silent Way. But the milestone album was Bitches Brew, which took a lot of its sound from rock. Miles's collaborators spread out to explore the possibilities this fusion brought them. Pianist and composer Joe Zawinul teamed up with saxophonist Wayne Shorter to form Weather Report, a band whose catchy tunes and approachable sound helped bring this form of jazz a high level of commercial success. Pianist Chick Corea began Return to Forever, with a sound more akin to progressive rock, before starting his electric band in the 80s. These bands formed the starting ground for many musicians in the jazz rock idiom. But you didn't have to fuse with only rock though. John McLaughlin took inspiration from the music of India for his Mahavision Orchestra. His collaborations with Trilok Gurtu is an interesting example, where he incorporates Konagal, an Indian system for rhythmic improvisation. Herbie Hancock came up with Headhunters, combining his interest in the development of the synthesizer with a funky sound. In a similar vein, you had the Brecker Brothers, coming with a rhythmic sound so aggressive they coined it heavy metal bebop. In the early 2000s, guitarist John Scofield teamed up with keyboardist and sound fanatic John Medeski to create an acid jazz soundscape. In more modern times, a musical style that has been hugely influential to jazz is hip-hop. Pianist Robert Glasper took the advanced harmonic intelligence of jazz and merged it with the culture of contemporary R&B, creating the award-winning album Black Radio. But what if you want to explore worlds of sound that cannot be played, or simply don't exist yet? Where do you go? Technological advancements of the past decades have changed everything about how we experience music. In the 70s, jazz musicians started imagining what sounds they would now be able to create, using the instruments they had spent years in mastering. The first that comes to mind, the synthesizer. Many of the aforementioned musicians used synthesizers to some extent, but most notable is Joe Zawinul, accredited with making the sonic capabilities of this instrument completely his own and turning it into a truly expressive instrument. Steps Ahead featured many new sounds, prominently featuring Michael Brecker playing an electronic wind instrument. Gruford pioneered the use of electronic drum pads, the precursor of modern electronic drums. Then there was the synth axe, an advanced guitar-like instrument, considered by professional guitarists today as the only truly successful guitar modification platform.
It has its own digital pitch code, and the instant the string is touched to it, that code is sent to the synthesizer via MIDI. So the glitching problems inherent in some systems really don't apply.
It perks the interest of Alan Holdsworth. Despite being a prolific guitarist and virtuosic violin player, this grump begrudged not having learned to play the saxophone. And with the synth axe in hand, crafted a unique sound very much a mixture between violin and saxophone, and developed a legato playing style to match. Pat Metheny, a legendary sonic explorer in his own right, created his own orchestrion, an all-in-one musical machine that he would be able to more or less improvise.
If I play a note, and you can see that pretty much as I do everything, the physical event occurs.
Jazz artists have always sought for new sound, new sonic landscapes to explore, new ways to express their individuality. An artist that epitomizes this idea is drummer Jojo Mayer. Seeking the new frontier, he took on a sound that represents the ultimate challenge: electronic music. He trained himself like a technical wizard to match the speed of digitally altered drum loops. He assimilated the vocabulary of digitally chopped up grooves in his improvisation. In his band Nerve, he and his fellow musicians seek to bring every possible sound under their control, insisting to play their music as live as they possibly can.
Vom Theatralischen, vom Präsentieren, vom Vorspielen. Oder wir wollen nicht vorspielen, wir wollen Musik machen, die nicht mehr aus einer Intention entsteht, sondern wirklich aus einem gemeinsamen momentanen Erlebnis. Oder wir wirklich nur noch ein Medium sind, das das ermöglicht.
Jazz is an idea, a drive for constant creation, the devotion to an instrument, a lifestyle seeking limitlessness. Birthed from this music came a dream. From utmost control to absolute prowess and scale, from the beautiful to the spiritual. The history of jazz has represented a search, conquering the outer reaches of the universe of sound and bringing them under the volition of a performing artist.